in the den of iniquity. Vicinity no pretty, calamity fi hit we any moment. What a pity. Tomorrow never certain. What was behind the curtain? The face of evil lurking with that shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble that either pop or topple. Many will fall and stumble. Let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso. Cannon could reach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. With the rubble steady rising, and hearts are compromising. Convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming, and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances, and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest, and the righteous in your corners.
The political third rail, ladies and gentlemen, a term that we are familiar with. Political third rail represents that basket, that bucket of topics that you cannot approach, that you cannot broach, that you cannot deal with, questions you cannot ask, okay? Topics for which it will be political suicide to approach, for which you would be crucified in the court of public opinion, for which you could be canceled, okay? Things that are not politically expedient to deal with. And in many cases, there are legitimate reasons why we should be careful of these minefields, these political minefields, if you will. However, the question still remains, if we are to stifle open discourse, then does this not give undue power to those whom decide what is within the Overton window, within the window of acceptable discourse, right? And are we not bending to the most sensitive amongst us, okay? That's the best interpretation, right? Best case interpretation is to say, well, you should not bend to the mob because they're irrational, and you should not bend also to the most sensitive amongst us. So we're going to be addressing questions such as these through the lens of a show done by Professor Glenn Loury recently. He is a professor of economics at Brown University. As you come and go ahead and click that like button, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a jam-packed, okay, rootin' tootin'. We're going to have a hot show today. So click that like button, click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Click the bell button twice. We are going to get right into this question, okay? Now, Professor Glenn Loury is, as I mentioned, a professor, but he also has a YouTube channel. Check out his channel, The Glenn Show. And he recently had a show where he was at the Comedy Cellar, and he invited comedians. And the question is this, okay? If these minefields exist, okay, whom can go in there? Whom are the experts? Maybe some of us are bumbling fools, and maybe some of us will expose our privilege or our innate bias or racism or whatever it may be. Maybe we're not qualified to ask these questions about, for example, what are the negative effects with regards to the relationships between men and women that the Me Too movement had. Relationships between men and women in the workplace, mind you, okay? And it would seem from an empirical point of view, from a scientific point of view, that when one makes changes, when one pushes back on certain things, when political agitations are made, such as, for example, the Me Too movement, that it makes sense to look and see, okay, what has happened? What are some of the trade-offs? Are some of these trade-offs worth it? How can we augment, change, shift, reiterate, learn, move forward? But some topics are purely taboo, again, because there is an Overton window that is decided from on high. And then there's the question of sensitivity, the catering to the most sensitive amongst us, ladies and gentlemen. So let's go ahead and ask the question. Who can talk about it then? Well, Glenn Loury says, well, let's go ask the comedians. Let's talk to some comedians at the Comedy Cellar. Let's talk to some comedians at the Comedy Cellar. Because the question is this: if no one can talk about it, even if the comedians cannot talk about it, then does it not spell the death knell to free thinking? You see, thinking is a dialogue. Thinking is a dialogue, right? It's not a monologue. We might think that it's a monologue, but think about it. Thinking happens something like this: it's a dialogue between two aspects of yourself. One side of yourself wants to take a break and go have a sandwich. The other side of yourself is saying, hey, there is a deadline. Okay, let's say your stomach and the microbes in your stomach are like, hey, let's go get a sandwich. Your brain and some other aspirations, or shall we say goals that you have, is saying, hey, we have to finish this job and then maybe we'll go get the sandwich. So there's this negotiation going between your stomach and your head, let's say. And this is what thinking is. So if you shut down the voices of the community, okay, it is dialogical dialogue back and forth thinking, do you not shut down thinking in and of itself when you shut down some of these voices? Okay. Again, the proposition is that thinking is a dialogue, and to shut down the dialogue is to shut down thinking in and of itself. Ladies and gentlemen, let us begin by starting out this clip. Fair use.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and make some noise for Professor Glenn Loury.
In the house at the Comedy Cellar. I mean, I'm just a professor, you know. They didn't teach us this in graduate school. But good evening, everybody. Glenn Loury, Brown University. I am with Roland Fryer, Harvard University. Coleman Hughes, extraordinary musician, podcaster, and writer, Columbia University graduate, and our host, Norm. We've got some talented comics in the audience. The theme tonight is comedy and politics. Now, I came to this from many years of trying to write about race and racial inequality issues in America, and finding that there were third rails. There was stuff that you couldn't say. There was a lot of political correctness. There's a lot of self-censorship. And I have this idea. My idea, and we'll see what my colleagues here think about it, here at the Glenn Show. I don't think I said that. That's
Subscribe to Glenn Loury.
That's my podcast.
Go out there to the Glenn Show.
At Substack,
I will leave the link right now in
Glenn
the
Loury
comment.
Show. But
pinned to the top.
Trying to talk about these issues in a way that opens up some space for exchange of ideas, for grappling with the stuff that we really have to grapple with if we're going to get to be in a better.
Good. So I just mentioned, okay, that thinking is a dialogue. Thinking is grappling. Thinking is debate. Thinking is one side of you, okay, and we put it as crudely as your stomach, for example, arguing with your head. We all know about the thinking, do we not, Aaron B? We all know about the thinking that goes on when your little head and your big head are fighting, okay? In other words, thinking is a dialogue. It does not happen in isolation. It's not a still, small voice out there. There's something that has to do with a jujitsu match that goes on. Think about the adversarial system of the legal system, for example, okay? Whereby you have opposing views fighting it out. This is not to suggest, okay, that the adversarial system is perfect or can be perfectly implemented, but the idea is wherever we see the endeavor of trying to find truth, of trying to think through, we see this dialogue process. We see it in the scientific method, where there's a dialogue between the hypothesis and the experiment. You have a hypothesis, and then you go test it. You bang it around in the world, see if it works. And then you come back, you make inferences, you rewrite the hypothesis. This is a dialogical process. So when you shut down the voices, what you're actually doing is shutting down thinking. And the proposition will go, you're giving a whole lot of power to those whom decide what is okay to talk about. Hence, this self-censorship and political third rails, things you cannot talk about, it's very important from a societal point of view to discuss, because these thoughts have to be had. These thinking has to be done. Questions such as the ones that we asked today in the title of this video need to be asked. Okay. And let's let Glenn Lowry continue here.
Place, and for letting some air into the room. The stifling suppression of debate and open discussion leads to a limiting of our own ability to think about the issues that we're confronted with. And I see comedy. I mean, again, I don't know what my esteemed colleagues will say about this, and I certainly don't know what you comics out there are going to say about this. We're going to find out. I see comedy as a way out, as a way to open up the room, as a way to get some honesty into the discussion, as a way to have some debates. Now, my mouth is not a prayer book, but I do have some ideas. Here's some things that I wish comics would help us talk about. Male-female cooperative and non-exploitative relationships in the workplace have been undermined to women's detriment by the Me Too movement.
What do we think about that proposition? Okay, Glenn Lowry is about to list some questions. Questions that he says, hey, we're at a comedy club. Okay, now maybe this will not be welcome at the faculty meeting at the Department of Economics where Glenn Lowry is a professor. Okay, and Glenn Lowry is, by the way, he's a heavyweight. He's an intellectual powerhouse, sirs and ladies. Go and check him out. Okay, now, but here, he's asking the question about the Me Too movement and the effects that it has had between men and women in the workplace, the detrimental effects to women that it has had. Now, he's framing it in that way because it will be important if there is a movement that actually says, I'm here to further the interests of a group, but then the movement has side effects, which everything does, side effects, unwanted side effects, or trade-offs that actually do not benefit that group, then it makes sense for us to ask the question. So he's saying, hey, what are the detrimental effects to women of the Me Too movement? What are the detrimental effects to cooperative relationships in the workplace between men and women of the Me Too movement? And there's some questions that let's let him continue his list of questioning here. But there's a few things that come to mind with that regard. Let's go.
I don't agree with that.
Wait a minute, I got it from you.
That's a fair point.
Trump wasn't wrong about everything. There really are some shithole countries. You'd remember if you'd ever been in one.
Which is true, by the way. And that is very true. And how come we pretend like we don't understand this? How come we get weird, crazy? How come we listen to people whom come out and shriek and clutch their pearls about hearing such a proposition as S-hole countries?
And the Democrats have been running some of the cities where a lot of Black people live into the ground for decades. Here's another one, folks. Embrace yourselves. I'm sorry. Putin has some legitimate grievances which we have ignored in part at our peril because of the Russia collusion hoax. Yeah, I know. I know. Okay. You see some Black guys up here, right?
We're only like 5% into this list, so.
Buckle up.
Blacks suck at IQ tests. Jews don't.
Hence the title, ladies and gentlemen, hence the title of this video, that last point there. But as we introduce ourselves to this idea of the importance of the ability to discuss, because this is the same thing as thinking, okay? Whether we see it externally or we see it internally, thinking, the idea of weighing things, sifting through things rationally, experimentally, involves a dialogue. In other words, it involves a back and forth. Okay, you have to go through a scientific process, for example, that says, I'm going to have a hypothesis, I'm going to test it. Okay, you have to have a debate with yourself even about what your stomach wants, what your heart wants, what your feet wants, what are different parts, priorities and whatnot. Your future self versus your past self, arguing internally. This is what you call thinking, right? Well, first of all, can I get a 1 in the chat if we are in line with this definition of thinking, or that with this description of thinking, or with this idea that thinking actually is a dialogue. Thinking does just not happen with one source, that there have to be two things or three things or more things going on, even within the soul of one individual, for thinking to be happening. That there are different aspects of you that are battling out, that are weighing things, that are going on the one hand, on the other hand. And then also externally, as I said, you look at the scientific method, or you look at research, okay? Research questions, for example, that cannot be asked, such as the one about the IQ, okay? The IQ of different groups. Why do some groups suck at the IQ test? Okay, if we cannot ask those questions, then how can we have thinking and find truth about these things? Now, you could say, hey, it's a political landmine. Why are you trying to ask these questions in the first place? But let us go ahead and address all that, because all that is fair game, ladies and gentlemen. If we go back to the beginning of this list here.
Yes. Here's some things that I wish comics would help us talk about. Male-female cooperative and non-exploitative relationships in the workplace have been undermined to women's detriment by the Me Too movement.
Here's one point on that. One point on this very topic of the fact that male-female cooperative relationships have been undermined by the Me Too movement is basically, and I'll put it in milder terms, basically saying, talking about trade-offs, which is women want to be rightly integrated within the social groups at work, especially these social groups that determine whom moves ahead. The social groups with power, the social groups with influence. Okay, that's fair enough. That makes sense. We understand that. We know why that makes sense. Okay, but the idea is rather not so simple, is it? In a co-ed workplace, okay, what does the social group look like? What does it mean if Larry comes home and says, hey, I'm going to go hang out with the coworkers. I'm going to have beer with the boys. Okay, that's one thing. Larry goes home to his wife, Sandy. Larry tells Sandy, I'm going to go have beer with the boys. Okay, now it's a boys' crew, and we don't want that. We want women to be in that crew as well. So there's Jane at work. Jane also is not part of the crew, and Larry tells his wife, Sandy, that he's going to go have beer with the boys and Jane. Now, that changes things, does it not? It changes things for Larry, okay? It changes things for Larry's wife. Larry's wife is thinking, who is this Jane? Okay? I'm fine with you doing social activities with your buddies at work, insofar as it does not involve women. To put it in a particular, that might be the beginning stance that the wife would take, right? But then, okay, the wife, Sandy, may actually be someone, okay, that is a professional. Sandy is an accountant trying to get into the social groups with power at work. So at work, she is trying to hobnob with the social groups, but at home, she's stopping Jane from doing so. And perhaps Jane is stopping her husband from, you get the idea, okay? Now, this is something that I've not seen quite squarely addressed. And this does not necessarily even have anything to do with Me Too per se. It has something to do with the fact that if we're going to have this kind of a social cohesion and continue certain kinds of systems, such as work buddies and after work drinking of beer, which tends to be important, these groups form, these friendships form, these people get ahead and whatnot. If it's going to be a co-ed type situation, then things get a little bit more complicated, right? If Larry, again, is getting these texts from his group at work, okay, he's got a text group at work, and texts are buzzing in morning, noon, night. People are sharing memes. We all know these text groups, okay? And we're sharing memes with our work buddies, okay? That's one thing when it's the boys. But how about when Janet is in that group? You see, Sandy, Larry's wife, is not going to be very happy with that. Now, that is just one example, okay, of something that we tend not to want to address. We tend not to want to state. However, it's very common sense, and it is very real. It is not something that we're making. This is a conversation. This is something that's happening right here, right now, this very evening. There is a Larry somewhere that wants to go have beer, okay, and there is some kind of a thing going on with some Janet, and then, and friction with Larry's wife, Sandy. Okay, these are important things. Sandy wants to get her head in her work, but she looks at Janet as competition for her man at her man's work. You see, these things expose Janet's there to make her money, you say. Okay. Right, but are you going to how's Sandy supposed to feel about that? That Sandy is hanging out with, that Janet is hanging out with her husband. Janet is hanging out with her husband. Janet is part of the work crew. Janet is part of the work text group. Okay. Do we outlaw these kinds of extracurricular fraternization, therefore, in order to make it more inclusive? Okay. Or do we have to change our attitudes towards the Janets joining Larry for beers? We know that Sandy is not crazy for being skeptical, right? Okay. Hey, Hill, though, I mean, you're saying Sandy has feelings. However, Sandy is not crazy. There's a difference between Larry just drinking with the boys and Larry drinking with, the boys and Janet. In other words, again, there's the proposition that cooperative male and female relationships in the workplace are complex, and they have been affected by the Me Too movement in certain ways. And these are little boxes that we can open up and talk about. And the one that I'm opening up and talking about right now is rather innocuous, not dangerous, and rather common sense, in the sense that Sandy is not crazy to think, hey, yes, you can hang out with the boys, but there are no girls allowed in your work crew, Larry. So who's blocking Janet? It turns out that Sandy is at home blocking Janet from joining the work crew and advancing her career. Okay. I'm putting this in rather caricature and crude forms, but the idea is this is something that you can clearly imagine happening right now. You could just sit there while you listen to the show with your headphones and whatnot. You can imagine this happening right now. Perhaps it has happened to you. Okay. These kinds of questions are the kinds of questions that Glenn Loury is talking about. So that's the first question he brings up. Let's continue.
I don't agree with that.
Wait a minute, I got it from you.
That's a fair point.
Trump wasn't wrong about everything. There really are some shithole countries. You'd remember if you'd ever been in one. And the Democrats have been running some of the cities where a lot of black people live into the ground for decades.
A. Hill has a lot to say about Sandy. To be honest, actually, I've never gotten a woman's perspective on this particular topic. It just seemed to be so normal or natural to me. Was the first thing I noticed is like, hey, you know what? There is fraternization that goes on outside of work, and it is important to people's careers. Okay. The 9 to 5, the cubicle stuff, that's not really where the bonds are formed or where the people socialize. I mean, think about it. We talk about the golf games where the deals are closed and all those other kinds of things, right? And Janet is a up and coming career woman, and she wants to be part of the golf games and the drinking and whatnot. But Sandy, the wife of Larry, one of the boys, is saying, hey, who's this Janet lady? And A. Hill is saying, look, Janet keeps blocking the Sandys of this world, the career women of this world, saying, hey, and telling their respective husbands not to participate in co-ed activities, but they don't block the strip club, okay, and whatnot. Now, that's a good point. That's a good point, okay? Now, the question is, I think perhaps also that Janet probably is participating in the kind of blocking that Sandy is doing. I'm saying, look, Janet goes to work. She wants to hang out with the boys, okay? And the fact that they're boys is important here. That's the whole point. Okay? That is the whole point. And this is the point where the sensitive or the third rail people or the political correct people say, well, what do you mean? We can't talk about this. They get uncomfortable. But look, Janet wants to hang out with the boys because we know extracurricular activities at work is kind of where bonds get formed. And these things are not necessarily horrible things. Sometimes the most competent people like to hang out with each other outside of work and complain about all the other idiots. So if you want to be in the competent crew, maybe you want to join that. So Janet, okay, is out there trying to join the boys' crew. But Janet might go home and then complain about another lady, let's call her Lori, that's trying to join her husband's work crew. So you got Sandy blocking Janet. Janet goes home and blocks Lori. And everyone is wondering why the tension, why the confusion, and so on and so forth. Shout out, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you click that like button as you come in. Click the subscribe button if you have not already. Click the bell button twice. Shout out to Bijou Noir in the building. How's it going? Long time. Dr. Thunder in the building. Also, go ahead and support the show. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, today we're talking about political third rail. We're talking about those things that you cannot discuss. And we know that thinking is dialogue. There is no monologue type of thinking, whether it's external in the scientific method or people doing research and arguing, or the adversarial method in court, or internal when your little head is battling your small head. That's what thinking is. Thinking is never a monologue. Okay. And shout out to the still small voice, the voice of God. Maybe that's the one. When you hear the monologue, yeah, that's the voice of God. Okay. But typically, thinking is a back and forth. The stomach wants something, the head wants another thing. They balance each other out. The future self has priorities, the past self has other priorities. They have to fight each other out. There are different aspects to yourself. Okay. And this is what thinking is. And if we shut down the voice of any aspects, both externally or internally, how do we ask these difficult questions, such as, do blacks suck at IQ tests, for example? Okay. Let us continue.
Here's another one, folks. Embrace yourselves. I'm sorry. Putin has some legitimate grievances which we have ignored in part at our peril because of the Russia collusion hoax.
Just a word on that before we move on, because this is not a show that's focused on geopolitical issues. Okay. However, I mean, this particular episode here, we're talking about third rail topics domestically and how we grapple with them. And these things tend to surround issues of identity, race, gender, whatnot. Now, with the Putin thing, okay, Putin, shall we say, the Soviet Union was rather badly treated after the war. That's what tends to happen after wars. Okay, after the World War I, the Treaty of Versailles, Germany treated badly. They come back for World War II. Okay, the Soviet Union fell and they were kind of kicked around a little bit. And America looked at Russia, okay, looked at the great Eurasian empire, eighth of the landmass of the globe, as though, oh, they're just mini wannabe Americans. They just want to be like us. They want to be the West. They want all that stuff that we do, the capitalism and all our institutions and things we've created. That is exactly what they want, and they want it the way we're going to give it to them. Not understanding that these people, okay, again, 1/8 of the landmass, have come through, okay, have had a history, a cultural history that involves this vast landmass empire, okay, all the way from close to Baghdad down through the Eurasian steppes and everything. This Eurasian empire sees itself as something quite different from the West, and it is going to need to assert itself. And the West mistake was to think that everyone else just wants to be like them, as opposed to looking at other entities that you have to contend with as actually being different. Now, just because they're different doesn't mean you have to acquiesce to them, but treating them as though, you just want to be like me is not the way to go, ladies and gentlemen. But anyways, let's continue there as we made that little detour, that little tangent with regards to Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, I know. I know. Okay. You see some black guys up here, right?
We're only like 5% into this list, so
Buckle up.
Blacks suck at IQ test.
All right. So, The Bell Curve is a book that some of us may have heard of, written by Charles Murray. And if you take what the Overton window people tell you, the politically correct people tell you, the people whom tell you what you should be offended at, the people whom tell you whom is a racist and whom is some other ist or phobe, right? They will tell you that The Bell Curve is a racist book, that Charles Murray is a racist person, that this was not an actual work of social science. It was, why would you be asking about the differences between groups in terms of IQ? Okay. Now, it was a study that looked at class and IQ, by the way. Class correlates with racial groups, looking and seeing that actually there is this correlation, as we're not so surprised. Would we be very surprised? Would you be very surprised, Dr. Thunder, that the classes with money somehow there's some kind of a correlation with IQ going on there? Now, you could talk about nature, nurture, you could talk about causal effects, you could talk about a feedback loop that goes on there. You can go on and on and on. Okay. There are many things that could be said. But number one, you're not surprised that there might be a correlation, or you're not surprised that the question should be asked, okay, that if we're going to understand the reasons for disparities in outcomes, such as economic outcomes, then should we not look at perhaps other possible sources other than, shall we say, just pure discrimination and power plays by groups? If indeed there's an IQ thing to be measured in there, well, how much does IQ does IQ affect this? How much can IQ be changed as a result? And so on and so on. However, you're not supposed to be asking these kinds of questions. Charles Murray wrote a very, shall we say, tame, innocuous book called The Bell Curve, and he's been dubbed a racist ever since for even asking the question. And this is not to the benefit of Black people. This is not to the benefit of Black people to say that you cannot ask questions. That is a position of weakness. Now, this is an argument I'm making. I'm not saying that this is the way it should be, but I'm saying that not asking the question is a position of weakness. And then someone else would have to come in and say, well, here's why I think you shouldn't ask the question. Or here's why I think it's not necessarily all about weakness. Or here's why we shouldn't ask certain questions, because they are indeed politically dangerous. Well, why do you want to know the differences between the races in terms of IQ? Why do we want to know these things even? Okay. What is your motive behind these things? Okay. And we might think that this is a reasonable question to ask a researcher. A researcher comes through, Charles Murray comes through and says, hey, I've been looking at these disparities in IQ scores and then correlating them with economic outcomes, classes, races, and whatnot. And I think perhaps it's an interesting story to be told, an interesting, shall we say, insight to be gained, some interesting further questions to be asked. But some people say, no, you cannot ask that. So let's see. Let's check out, in defense of Charles Murray here, with Mr. Sam Harris and Glenn Lowry here again. Fair use.
Now, you mentioned Charles Murray, and you said whether it's cultural or biological or whatever, and I'm aware of your big debate with Ezra Klein, wasn't some years ago, about Murray and all of that stuff. You got it. You taking any of it back, or are you still holding out for whatever
Well,
you're holding out for?
I was not holding out for
Tell me
any
whether or not the
positive.
Pardon Sam Harris's microphone, by the way. I have no idea why this dude, okay, Sam Harris, as popular as he is talking into a freaking shit tin can, sounding like, anyways, you know what, just apologies for his microphone.
Part of his thesis, apart from the necessity of being able to talk about these things without being branded a racist when it's obvious that you're not a racist, right? That was the hill I was prepared to die on, right? It's not. I mean, the truth is I have as close to zero interest in racial differences in anything as I think you can have, right? I'm just not interested in the topic. What I am interested in is the silencing effect of the perception that if you violate any one of a number of increasing number of taboos erected on the left and by our most prestigious institutions, journalistically and academically, you risk defenestration, right? So when Charles Murray stands up, 25 years after he wrote his infamous book, which I hadn't read at the time because had been convinced by all the bad PR that this was just racist,
Even Sam Harris, okay, even Sam Harris fell for the okey doke. And now that he is, because he has switched his position in the sense that, look, what is he saying? He's saying, look, it's not that I have a dog in the fight of IQ measuring IQ amongst groups, talking about the sources of, IQ, nature, nurture. Okay. It's not that I have a particular dog in the fight of asking questions such as, well, do groups that, shall we say, are isolated geographically and through time genetically, and that they come through from a common stock, okay, that do these different groups coming from different stock and isolated, do they have different attributes psychologically, physiologically, and whatnot? It would not be a surprise that they would have different attributes. Okay. Now, Sam Harris is saying I don't have a dog in that fight, but I don't like when people have these taboos, again, erected mainly in the left. And he says that in these institutions, for example, of higher learning and in the media, erect these taboos and then say you cannot say anything about it. So that's his deal here. Okay. He's saying, look, it's not that I have a bone to pick in this particular area, but these people told me that Charles Murray was a racist. And I was laboring under the assumption all these years that Charles Murray was a racist for asking questions about IQ and race. And then when Sam Harris read the book, he's like, what the hell are these people talking about? And by the way, it's a book that I encountered a long time ago as well. Now, given my personality, okay, and yes, I'm bragging a little bit, I don't fall for the kind of crap that Sam Harris falls for. Sam Harris is a little bit of a soy boy, listening to idiots, right? He too is a little bit of an idiot himself. Yes, I said it. Sam Harris is a little bit of an idiot. But, I'm not picking bones with Sam Harris today. He's actually making sense right now. But the idea is, okay, he fell for the okie doke. He fell for people telling him that this person is a racist because they wrote some kind of a book. And then years and years, he refused to look at the book. Like, oh my God, the book will kill me. I can't look at the book. And then he finally looks at the book and he's like, hey, there's nothing racist in this book. There's nothing racist in the man per se. Okay. And now he's changing his tune and saying, look, I'm not particularly a fan of the area of inquiry, but you guys that come out here and tell me what not to look at, and you have all these things about this person is a devil and whatnot, and then I look in there and all I see is legitimate questions such as the ones we've been asking so far in this stream today, then I have an issue with that, goes Sam Harris, the idiot.
Moral pollution, essentially. When he stands up 25 years after having written many other books in the interim on different topics at Middlebury, and gets deplatformed semi-violently, such that his host gets a concussion, I think, or a neck injury. I
think it was a neck injury.
A real problem there that I wanted to talk about, and so in the course of talking about it, we spoke about his actual thesis, which again is routinely misrepresented. I mean, it's when you look at the most controversial paragraph in the bell curve, which I then went and read in advance of speaking with him.
I have read the bell curve cover to cover.
Paragraph in there is a paragraph where he and Herrnstein say, we don't know what contribution.
So this book, The Bell Curve, by the way, goes through a study. So Charles Murray is a respected and respectable social scientist, just like Glenn Loury, okay, doing good work. And then in this book, they do the work, gathering the data. And then what do they say about the data? They say, hey, we don't know. In other words, this book actually bends over backwards, does backflips and all kinds of craziness to try to show that, hey, we're not racist, right? We don't know what this data means, but we think that there's something here that's important as far as public policy goes. Because if we're looking at disparities in outcomes, we may want to understand the variety of factors that affect these. And we may want to weigh these different factors, okay? You have an equation, right? You have on one side this particular outcome, and then you have all the factors that affect it on the other side. Well, how much do these different factors affect it? What are the constants in front of these factors? Do they affect it exponentially or linearly? Like, what does this equation look like? Okay. For those of you whom remember your high school algebra, what does that polynomial look like? Okay. What are the different terms? What's A, B, and C squared and all that kind of stuff? I need to know the terms. Okay. And then they say, hey, we are not making any claims as to what this means, but still people call them racist.
Herrnstein say, we don't know what contribution biology and environment make to these differences. It seems rational to assume that both are involved. I'm paraphrasing here.
They are resolutely agnostic. Excuse me for interrupting, but the words are important.
But
They're resolutely
if you
agnostic.
interpret us to have made the claim that one or the other accounts for the whole story, you have misunderstood us, right? We just don't know. And for that, he has been burnt as a witch, figuratively speaking, but reputationally, it has been the case, repeatedly
for decades. Okay, for decades, this guy is persona non grata all through the universities. You would think that he was Hitler's brother that helped him out all through the war and then got away with it because of his corrupt cousin in the Hague or something. Okay, you would think so. You would think the book is worth burning. Okay, these are actual effects affecting your ability to think, affecting your ability to consume the research that is out there, to have this dialogue. The dialogue has been stifled now. Okay. Again, we said, hey, there may be reasons for blocking these minefields. However, it's also true that it is a pandering to the most sensitive amongst us. And then number two, it also stifles thinking. And there's nothing you can do about the fact that it stifles thinking. Number three, it gives power to those whom do the deciding. And Sam Harris named them: media and academics. Okay. What does Dr. Thunder call it again? PWI. Yes, PWIs and media, setting the agenda, saying what the Overton window is, saying what the window of acceptable discourse is. That gives them a lot of power. And that stifles thought. And also, ladies and gentlemen, let us continue. Okay. Now, Sam Harris has a bone to pick with the whole thing, with this whole race and IQ thing, by the way. And we'll also talk later about why I think Sam Harris is an idiot. I'm being provocative slightly, but there's an explanation.
A quarter of a century. I just find that to be, obviously there are many other cases of people touching far less radioactive topics, where now, we're seeing the cancellation of people. And so I perceive, in hindsight, to be a kind of canary in the coal mine. And so anyway, I had him on my podcast, and that proved to be every bit as controversial as I had reason to fear it would be. I mean, I did.
After what book? Excuse me again for interrupting. After what book?
It wasn't actually in reference to a book. I don't know when he had published his last book. I think the book before had been Coming Apart.
That's a good comment there. Okay, a good comment there about, disparities between groups that are biologically, or shall we say, geographically isolated. They come up, common genetic stock, what we tend to call, they could be called races or ethnic groups. Either way, we know what these different peoples are and how they tend to share phenotype and other kinds of things, like the Kenyans winning the marathon and the Filipinos not winning the marathon, which is my favorite, very easy to understand and very easy for everyone to agree type of difference, right? Now, if you look at the IQ of some African countries, you will find, okay, that the average IQ is 70. Now, what does that mean? That's an interesting question, because if you have an IQ of 70 in the United States, you're almost an imbecile. Shout out to the, no shade to the under 70 IQ people, but you cannot function, okay, if in the West here, IQ 17 means you're not functioning. But go to Africa, and these average people with the quote unquote 70 IQ, they're your bus drivers and your mechanics, and they're your regular dudes. They're the dudes over here coming on the manosphere saying, my thing is, point is, if they were in Africa, they would have 70 IQ. So I say that to say that the comment on the screen that says, as an analogy, groups of people whom evolve different all have same amount of raw IQ. So as a, shall we say, as a statement. So if we take that, for example, but then they use the IQ to solve different problems based on environment, hence what it means to have a 70 IQ in Africa versus a 70 IQ in the West is actually very different based on empirical, no, let me not call it empirical, it's not quite scientific in that sense, but based on observable data. You've measured IQ in one place, and you know the kinds of predictions you can make about people with a certain kind of IQ, let's say 70, and you know that they're more or less useless within the society. But then you go to another place, and people have an IQ of 70, and they're not useless. And they're doing the things that the people in your country cannot do. I think that these questions, as a matter of fact, these questions don't get actually quite tackled because people want to run and hide and be ashamed and feel guilty and pull out the race card and all those other kinds of things. So before we get to why Sam Harris is an idiot, we're going to continue with and find out what exactly his bone to pick is with the asking of the question. Because he says, look, he's fine that you should be able to ask the question, but he wants to ask, why are you asking the question? Now, I think that's silly, but that's not why I think Sam Harris is an idiot. I just think he's an idiot just because that's what he is. But he asks the question, why would you want to ask about race and IQ? So let's see him frame it.
Yeah, okay. It was before human diversity
and
is really what I'm.
And so I did pay quite a reputational price for even having that conversation with him and giving him as much aid and comfort as I did in that podcast. But I viewed it as as morally important to do because it just seemed insane what was happening at that point around him and around everyone. I mean, J.K. Rowling and anyone else who's getting pilloried for having said something deemed blasphemous.
Murray is a special case. I actually teach the Murray case in my course on free inquiry in the modern world at Brown, where I'm, resolutely not agnostic about the issue of whether or not you should be able to investigate such questions. Of course you should. What are we doing putting our heads in the sand? And what are we doing to science, which is the foundation of our civilization, if we are, it's a kind of corruption of our intellectual life to foreclose the discussion of important questions based on evidence. Murray doesn't have to be right or wrong about that, but clearly the question doesn't answer itself. It's not a priori obvious what the answer to the question is. Question being, to what extent does biogenetic inheritance influence the expression of intellectual ability as measured by cognitive ability tests in modern society? That's a hard question. It's an important.
Yeah, when you put it that way, it doesn't sound so bad, right? It doesn't sound so bad. However, here's the thing that people do. They will say, okay, Glenn, you just papered that over with nice words. You said, you said what you said, but we know the reason why you're asking that, right, is because you're really racist. Isn't that right, Dr. Thunder? Glenn just said, what do the genetics play a factor, bio, whatever, intelligence? I was like, bruh, you're just playing games to try to suppress people. You're playing games to try to keep up the power dominance, which we know that the whole post-modern power structure is all based on group suppression. Your institutions, your language, even your science, sir, and your research, that's the white man's research and the white man's science. And you, Glenn Loury, are just another Uncle Tom out here repeating their talking points.
Have to be right or wrong about that, but clearly the question doesn't answer itself. It's not a priori obvious what the answer to the question is. Question being, to what extent does biogenetic inheritance influence the expression of intellectual ability as measured by cognitive?
Biogenetic inheritance affect the expression of intellectual ability. Nah, you're a racist. Now, here's the thing, though. I don't discount that impulse to say, look, you're just saying nice words. And by the way, the reason why I don't discount this is because I get accused of this a lot. Okay. Now, if you are cursed with, just loving ideas and liking to think and, are always picking and tumbling things over and getting into subtleties and equivocating and on the one hand, on the other hand, and smoking your pipe and discussing, you can come across to most people as someone that just likes to BS, likes to say things that you really don't mean or hide behind words, that you're really not saying what you mean, that you're really a racist. Why do you want to investigate this thing? Why would you ask such questions? Why would you ask for the subtlety in this thing? Why would you ask about the fact that Sandy is mad at Janet because Janet is trying to go out with Sandy's husband as part of the work group? Okay. Remember that? Okay. Sandy is hating, blocking Janet because she doesn't want Janet to be part of the boys club at her husband's work. So Sandy is actually oppressing her fellow sister. And I'm saying that this I guess, okay, and it's a good, perhaps good research for some social scientists out there to see how this network of Sandys, okay, are out there blocking the career woman who would like to climb. And we understand that climbing is not just about 9 to 5; it involves fraternization and other kinds of extracurricular activities to be part of the group, which heretofore was a boys group. And now, if you want to join into the boys group, the husbands of the the wives of the boys, okay, the wives of the boys, these so-called Sandys, are out there blocking you, okay. But anyways, the reason why I commiserate with people asking that question of like, look, why are you just saying this, Glenn Lowry? Why would you talk about biogeneric inheritance and the expression of intellectual ability? Who cares about that? You're just trying to be a racist. You're just playing the white man's flute and whatnot. So I understand why people would say that, because people do BS a lot. People do actually have ill intentions, and they would hide behind certain words. But what I do say is this: it's a risk that we have to take. Simple. The trade-off of losing actual thought, freedom of expression, and whatnot is too much. The trade-off of losing thought, freedom of expression, and whatnot is too much simply to guard the gates against some would-be assholes. You're trying to guard the gates against some would-be assholes, and therefore you shut down all thinking and all talking and all questionings of certain sorts.
Clearly, the question doesn't answer itself. It's not a priori obvious what the answer to the question is. Question being, to what extent does biogenetic inheritance influence the expression of intellectual ability as measured by cognitive ability tests in modern society? That's a hard question. It's an important question. You get to ask that question. That's not a moral question. That's a question of cause and effect, and so on. And what manner of society will we have become if not only asking the question is forbidden, but defending the asking of the question is forbidden? I mean, like right here, right now, I'm Black. Everybody expects me to give a certain speech, and I'm not giving that speech. That speech is Charles Murray, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, is a white supremacist. That speech is that the line from Charles Murray to Jared Taylor is a short, straight line. Jared Taylor being American Renaissance guy, and he's a white supremacist. And, Jared Taylor, he gets to have his views too. I don't have to agree with them for him to be able to have his views too, but that's a separate question. Charles Murray, Losing Ground, was probably the most important book about social policy written in the second half of the 20th century. It was published in 1984. It was Murray's first big book. And it shaped the discussion about welfare policy to a very significant extent, especially on the right, but also in the center left. The Welfare Reform Acts of 1996 that Bill Clinton signed into law were substantially influenced by the work of Charles Murray and that critical assessment of the impact of the Great Society, social policy on inequality in America. That's the author of Losing Ground. Coming Apart is a very, very prescient. I mean, Robert Putnam, the very esteemed and distinguished Harvard political scientist, basically is following in his book, Our Kids.
Again, just going through the bona fides of the author of The Bell Curve, Charles Murray, saying, hey, this is a serious guy, wrote many serious books, prescient books that predicted a lot of stuff. Great social scientist. He's not a racist for asking certain questions.
Is basically following in Charles Murray's footsteps, pointing out that there's now opioid epidemic coming and there are deaths of despair right around the corner, and we had better pay attention to the separation and quality of life between class straight amongst white people in this country, or else we're going to miss the boat. Donald Trump became president in part because of the forces that Charles Murray was putting his finger on and Coming Apart. You're going to relegate him to the margins because he dared to ask a question about intelligence and class structure in American life, of which only one small part of the big compendium had to do with race, and now he's a racist and he's a white supremacist. You know nothing anti-intellect.
Intelligence and class structure. Intelligence and class structure. Would it be crazy to find out that those rich people are actually smarter than you? Would it be not an interesting question to find out, well, just how smart and how smart are their kids, and how do they end up with these smart kids if this is the case? How much nature versus nurture is this? How much nutrition? And shout out to Dr. Thunder. Maybe the food desert is keeping the intercity kids dumb. Okay? Maybe that's it.
Intellectual thugs. I mean, the people who want to shut up a discussion about this question and who want to make it a sign of your decency and your legitimacy for membership in society to castigate and ostracize Charles Murray, which I am not going to do. Those people are a threat to civilization in my opinion.
Yeah, although there is one aspect of this which I'm a little conflicted about, because I don't know where to draw the line here. I mean, I don't even know where to draw the line with respect to Murray, who I don't know well. I mean, my only conversation with him, I believe.
This is a very good question. McDrama Bear asked a very good question, saying, hey, you know what? Why is Glenn so adamantly for Murray, saying maybe there's no motive? Okay. Now, I'm not going to speak for Glenn. What I'm going to do is I'm going to speak for a group that I think Glenn belongs to. And this is a personality thing. And I'm not just pulling crap out of my butt. I don't do that over here. I think that my track record has proven that. I'm just saying that Glenn's personality doesn't care if you actually. Glenn knows that you may have you may have an ulterior motive while you're asking that question. I and Glenn are fine if you're actually a racist and that's why you're asking the question. It doesn't matter to us. The fact is, it's a legitimate question. It's a simple logical proposition. It's just intuitive thinking and proper scientific pursuit, given ends that we have already established in the society vis-a-vis class structure, vis-a-vis disparities in outcomes and whatnot. That these questions are relevant. And if you're a racist asking the question, I don't care. That is the Glenn Lowry position. Okay. Now, that's not most people's feelings, though, but that doesn't make us wrong. Glenn and I and people like us who don't care the motives behind your question. We don't care the motives behind we don't care whether you cheated on your wife and therefore your math is wrong. I don't care. I don't care what kind of a person you are. I am for the truth, for the knowledge, right? And again, not everyone is like that. As a matter of fact, majority of people are not like that. It's not that they don't think. People like to think and do logic and rational things like that. But some of us don't give a crap, and we assume that there's always a bad motive. Of course there's a bad motive. You have a bad motive, okay? No shade to Dr. Thunder, but he probably has some bad motives that he's exercising out of himself right now, trying to kill the demons. You, adult supervision, A. Hill, Sam Harris, everybody has bad motives, okay? But that doesn't bother me, nor does it bother Glenn.
Was on that podcast, and I certainly don't think he's a racist, but I do question why he has given so much attention to this issue. Right, this is the one question I asked him in my podcast, which I felt like I didn't get a satisfactory answer to. It's like, why go there, or why go there this much, right? And I can.
So here's where Sam Harris is asking that question of why go there, okay? And you can kind of already see in Glenn's face that that question is already dangerously too close to you trying to be the person that controls the Overton window. You are trying to make a case that there is a case to be made for somebody determining the questions to be asked. I say no. I don't care where the question came from. It is a question. And there's such a thing as logical form. And if it takes the form, again, pardon me, I'm an engineer, okay? Glenn is a mathematician / economist. We don't care about your motives per se. I'm not saying because we're mathematicians and economists. It is a personality thing, okay? The personality thing. But the idea that Sam Harris now wants to question the question or question the questioner or question the motives of the questioner, say, hey, why are you asking that question? That tells me, hey, Sam, chill. I don't want you determining who asks any damn questions, especially you, Sam, your dumbass.
Answer to. It's like, why go there? Or why go there this much, right? And I can imagine.
Let me ask you a question, Sam. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I just want to know why he has to have an answer to that question. Why an investigator has to justify to anybody why they're investigating something. Because that's ad hominem. When you ask him why, it's as if you suspect that his motives are somehow impure. And his motives have nothing to do with the validity of his... There
you go. So I know Glenn, plus, again, I just know the type. There's this type of person that is like, if you give me a logical proposition, I don't care who brought it up. I don't care who asked it or why they asked it. I'm very comfortable, okay? I like to call it, and I borrowed, shout out to Audra, I borrowed this from her, okay? Stickiness is the dimension that I'm describing. And if you would pardon me a second, I would describe it. Some people have what I call stickiness in their personality, such that if they look at a question, okay, they have to ask, okay, how is this question going to make people around me feel? Where does this question come from? What are the possible implications of this question? In other words, this question sticks to many different aspects of what they consider to be objective reality and important questions and whatnot. Does that make sense? Okay. We got a 1 in the chat if this stickiness concept is coming through. That Sam Harris and most people have that stickiness where they're like, why are you asking that? Or is this question the right place or the right time? Or how does the room feel? And how does this affect, in other words, how about what would my dad think about it? And how does this represent my group? And how does this represent my power structure? And all these kinds of things there. Everything is sticky. It's sticky. It's sticky. You can't just abstract the question away. And then you have some people, and these two types have obvious advantages and disadvantages. Okay. Some people like myself, I'm not sticky at all. Like, it's just like, you can ask me anything and there can be any question anywhere. I just see the whole structure of logic and reasoning to just be there to be picked apart. Like, I see the individual cells. I can move the pixels around without having to blow up the whole world. I can zoom in into this one particular area, move a few pixels, rearrange them, and zoom out. What's the big deal? Says me. However, there's a disadvantage to being someone like me, just like there's a disadvantage to being someone like Harris. We need both, though, because people like me who just are non-sticky all the time, you know what it's like to be around people like us, right? It's we can be seen as rather cold, cruel, saying things that, being direct and all those kinds of things. Those, shall we say, they have these negative social consequences. The negative social consequences of saying, hey, I'm not going to stick anything to anything. And if everything is open, every file is always open to be opened and re-examined. What's the big deal? It's just logic. It's just questions, right? So there's a big difference there with people. Let's take a step back. Sam Harris is questioning the questioning the motive of this IQ question.
Motives are somehow impure, and his motives have nothing to do with the validity of his statements about the question. You may say that you're not interested in the question, but whether or not why he's interested, I don't understand how that's.
You can make a larger argument here, and you need to make a larger argument, or at least assume you're on the right side of this argument when thinking through the social consequences, or just the sheer consequences of finding out certain facts, right? So I think there's certain forms of knowledge that are in fact dangerous and are best not sought, right? Or certainly best, and if sought, best not.
So Sam Harris is saying that there's some knowledge which is dangerous and best not sought. You can already feel Glenn being like, what the hell are you talking about, right? Again, I'm not an idiot about this. I understand that there's a personality dimension to it. What Sam is saying sounds like nonsense to me, but I know it's not nonsense. I understand that actually social cohesion, in other words, it is a reality that what I say is going to affect people in a certain way. So Sam is right. So shout out to Dr. Thunder. Okay. Thank you for the super chat. Very, very well appreciated. Says an interesting point vis-a-vis this whole stickiness question, I believe. An interesting point is that men tend to focus on the what and women on the why. Now, this, generally speaking, if I were to make some broad strokes type talk here, is related to this sticky versus non-sticky, because the sticky is the social, okay? The sticky is the social. The sticky needs social cohesion. If you think about it that way, it's actually sticky, right? It's actually social cohesion. So it can't just look at a question independent of motive. It can't just look at a question independent of possible consequence. It can't just look at a question independent of vibe and this, that, and the other. So a woman's place is to look at that kind of a thing. Woman now in quotes, meaning the average, meaning a scientific type talk, right? Okay. So they would more want to do that, which makes sense because of generally what they're up to. Okay. And then if a man is out there and says, let's say you are a hunter, okay, and you're a typical hunter man, and you're out there and somebody tells you, we cannot learn about that rock, we cannot learn about that tree because it's dangerous. And you're like, this has nothing to, like, I'm trying to hunt, I'm trying to be effective. I'm trying to conquer the external world. And in my conquest of the external world, a stoic attitude towards objective facts is required. Hence, no stickiness.
Not published widely. I wonder whether in the case of, doing a deep dive on, intellectual differences between various groups, we're on similar ground here. Like, why seek this knowledge? What are we going to do with the knowledge, and why seek it? Now, I agree that we may be ambushed by this knowledge anyway.
Okay, let me interrupt again. Let me interrupt again, sir. Excuse me. No, I mean, the primary question is not about groups. The primary question is about individuals. The group question, it seems to me, only to be a derivative or a second order question that arises once you've undertaken the primary investigations, which is understanding the foundations of human intelligence and its distribution in populations. So I don't know how you police the investigation of the determinants of human intelligence so as to avoid.
So Sam feels comfortable policing and gating certain things. It's part of the whole reason, by the way. This pattern that he has, that he's doing here, is part of why I think he's an idiot. Okay. Now he's one of those kinds of idiots that, you have to pay attention to, in the sense that he's got a good head on his shoulders, and he has good firepower. He's got great hardware, is what I'm saying. However, he has massive blind spots and messed up software, as evidenced by the fact that he actually did fall for the okie doke that called Charles Murray a racist. If you tell me someone is racist, I'm gonna go pick up that book, because I'm not an idiot like Sam. Okay, if most people are just going around, oh, that's a bad thing, don't go over there. And idiots like Sam actually don't go there. And idiots like Sam actually want to go and make other gates of their own and ask you, hey, why should you ask this question? Now, Sam is one of the most reasonable idiots out there. Okay, and is also one of the most smart idiots. So when I call him an idiot, I'm not talking about his IQ. Okay, IQ is probably very high, but you guys know what I'm talking about, right? This is not as when you're having arguments at a certain level, it's not about IQ anymore. That makes you an idiot. Okay.
The politically disquieting group comparative undertaking. I mean, it just seems. I mean, and that's precisely my problem with this kind of moral management of scientific inquiry. I mean, it presumes a kind of omniscience.
Do you think it might be possible that it would be better if we didn't have group level data on all of these differences, and we just had individual data, right? So like we never took an inventory of what race you were or ethnic background you were. And we still, obviously every individual had to jump through all these hoops academically to get wherever they get. But at the end of the day, we weren't in a position to say, oh, we just looked at the MCAS scores for Blacks and Asians, and it turns out that there's, a vast gulf between them. What do you want to do with that factoid?
Well, I know what Charles Murray's answer to your question is, and I think it would be mine as well. Sure, we can do that, as long as you promise that we don't have a politics driven by the inequality and the representation of groups in these various activities.
So here's the thing. Sam makes a good point in his utopian way, where he says, look, the goal should be a world where you don't ask these questions. You guys get it? You get what Sam is doing? And Glenn is a smart guy, so Glenn blocked him from the other end. But let's repeat what Sam is doing. Again, Sam is questioning the questioners. Sam is questioning the motive of the question. Why are you trying to find out this relationship between class and IQ? And then you see a subset, which is race. And why are you keeping this data? Generally speaking, I agree with Sam, because I know that there are an infinite number of aspects which you can slice up any group, any particular lump of reality, and then take data and compare with other lumps. You can continually keep looking at a group and comparing, well, how many degrees does this group have versus that degree? How many of this type of degree? How many dollars? How many cents? How many yen? Or how much? What are the different kinds of businesses that they have? What are the different kinds of cars that Black people drive versus white people drive? What are the different kinds of shoes that we can go down, keep on slicing and parsing data and doing your comparison? So I understand that there is a point at which obviously it's futility, it's futile. Okay. Now he says, why ask these questions? But the point is, the media, the political landscape is already full of these questions being asked from the other side. In other words, people are already saying that, oh, the reasons because of this, that, and the other is because this person is Black, is because of this person's particular position in the intersectional map, right? In other words, people are already injecting these identity points into the question all over the political landscape. So how dare you tell me I cannot do scientific inquiry, but people are doing all kinds of rhetorical dances about why the outcomes are what we see them as, the economic outcomes, the class outcomes, the disparities of all kinds that people seek to redress through policy. People are already asking these questions. Sam?
I know what Charles Murray's answer to your question is, and I think it would be mine as well. Sure, we can do that as long as you promise that we don't have a politics driven by the inequality and the representation of groups in these various activities. I tell you what, you give up your racial justice weapon, where whenever the number of doctors who are Black is low, or the number of people who are promoted to partner at a law firm is low who are Black, or the number of people who get into the Bronx High School of Science is low, you give that up and you stop collecting those statistics. And I'm happy to do away with investigating group disparity and the determinants of human behavior that actually influence whether or not people excel at these activities. It seems to me one without the other.
Again, I'm open to argument on this point, but the world I think I want to live in is where race and other differences between groups.
Yeah, Sam does this thing. Okay, now he's going to go for this is my ideal. First of all, I have no dog in this fight. And my ideal world is such that there is no question about race and such. Therefore, I question people who bring it up because I'm trying to get this ideal. Well, there are many ways to get to the ideal. And first of all, the ideal is BS, right? First of all, the ideal is BS. Secondly, it's path dependent. There are several iterations of things that actually have to happen in order for you to get that ideal. You can't just go there with a straight line. You have to have people who agitate on one side, agitate on the other side. In other words, thinking has to happen. That dialogical process has to happen. Charles Murray has to come out with the data and say, hey, look at the data on how IQ correlates with class. And then the other people whom are saying other things, political machinations and blah, 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 narratives and whatnot, can then square up and say, hey, does my narrative, does my hypothesis match the data? Hence the whole dialogue, conversational aspect of science, of thinking, of inquiry. Okay? Sam thinks he knows where to put a pin on it. Generally speaking, this is a thing that I think Sam does. And let me answer the question now before we go on to the next piece here, which will be with Jordan Peterson and John McWhorter, talking also about this question. Now, this particular tendency of Sam, where he thinks that he has the ability to put a pin on things, is I can use as an entry point to describe why I think he's an idiot. So, take, for example, his conversations with Jordan Peterson. And pardon me here, this will only take a minute. Conversations with Jordan Peterson, where he thinks that he can objectively describe what the good is through what human well-being. In other words, a seeking of objective morality. Now, this is something that I had for the longest time had also been preoccupied with. Okay, because I'm a weirdo. I like to think, and I've always been this way. So one of my little projects, as a growing person, was to try to formalize objectively the question of morality. This is not a new thing in metaphysics and epistemology and ethics, in philosophy, in other words. But it's a challenging thing. It can never be gotten there. Okay, because Jordan Peterson is right. You cannot get an is from an ought. You cannot get an ought from an is, rather. In other words, all the scientific data in the world does not tell you how to act. Let me repeat that. All the scientific data in the world, data about all the possible outcomes of all the different trajectories, even every little molecule flashing everywhere and every little blade of grass and everything and everything and everything and everything and even more of everything doesn't tell you what to do. But Sam Harris thinks he can come in and put a pin somewhere where he says, I'm going to describe this little landscape here, this place where there are going to be objective facts as to what human well-being is, and then it just is that because I said that. Now, that's stupid, I think, Sam. Like, come on, because I've had the objective too of trying to find what could be said to be an objective morality, but everyone you come to, it is you whom is putting the pin somewhere and creating a set of axioms, okay, and then go from there. But then Sam pretends like he doesn't know that he was the one that put the pin there. He's saying, no, it's an objective pin. It's an objective pin. This is an objective pin. And Jordan Peterson is like, dude, what do you mean? How can you get an ought from an is? How can you tell me how to act, how to live, give me meaning, all these things without story, without myth? You want to give me through scientific data? And Sam will kind of buckle down and do his stupid thing that he does rather than be humble philosophically and say, yes, I have an imagination of an objective morality, but of course, just like any other construct, I have the axiom set Okay, I'm doing Euclidean geometry where I set certain axioms and then I start reasoning within those axioms, and it's going to be internally consistent. And I'll stop. Okay, I'll stop.
Has the moral and political status of hair color currently. Right. So we just simply don't have the data on how many blondes got into Harvard last year, and nor would anyone think to have that data. Right? We don't want the data. Nobody cares. How do we get there with respect to skin color and religion and anything else? Right. That's where I think I would want to be. And
so him saying all that, and look, you can just see Glenn's face. Okay, he just said that he wants to live in some other universe. That's basically what he's saying. That, oh, well, how can we live in this? It's like, dude, even if you saw that as a place where we're getting to, shall we say, historically style, in the Marxist style of the movement of history, or in a Hegelian style of movement of history, it's still got to be a dialectic. There still has to be the back and forth. It still has to actually happen, instantiate itself in the material reality, which Mr. Sam Harris doesn't seem to care about very much. He makes pronouncements, and his pronouncements are kind of like law. Like, yes, this is the objective reality. This is what human well-being is, and this isn't this and this and this is. It's like, dude, you can say all that, but you don't have to try to give it the power of God, the power of objectivity. You can say, hey, look, here's my construct of a moral objective landscape. What do you think about it? And then we can look at it, and also we can look outside it. Sam Harris says, no, there is no outside to my objective moral construct. It is the whole thing. It is objective. It is writ large. It is natural law, all those kinds of things. That kind of blindness, okay, is not an IQ blindness. So Sam Harris is smart traditionally, but a freaking idiot when it comes to these kinds of things. That's all. Now, we are going to move to John.
So I've been
here.
considering this proposition that's emerged from the woke end of the political spectrum. Let's say that all white people are racist, and I think, okay, are all white people racist? What's the answer?
What do you think? That's a good question. Are all white people racist? What do you think will come up if you ask Google that? Let me drop a poll, okay, and let me hear what you people have to say about it, okay? How would you answer this question? And by the way, as to the prior poll, we had some votes. The question was, well, do black people suck at IQ tests? And the majority is yes. 68% say yes. So 68% says yes, and we don't know why, and perhaps we need to investigate it. So racism aside, and all that kind of stuff aside, these are questions that are still worth investigating. It would seem that you guys have said. So let me go ahead and end that poll and start another poll. This time we're going to ask, are all white people racist? Let's continue.
So I've been considering this proposition that's emerged from the woke end of the political spectrum. Let's say that all white people are racist, and I think, okay, are all white people racist? What's the answer to that? And the answer is yes and no. And how dare you frame the question like that? That's the three.
Well, he said yes, no, and how dare you frame the question? Perhaps I could try to anticipate what the yes is. The yes is all white people are racist because all people are racist. Okay? Can we agree on that? Okay? Or is this another forbidden question, ladies and gentlemen? Can we agree that indeed everyone is racist? Everyone is affinitive. We have an affinity towards certain groups. In other words, empirically, it can be demonstrated. You throw people out there into the world, and what do? They self-segregate. Okay, you leave people up to their own devices, then they're gonna go with people whom are within their family. This is, after all, about genetics, is it not? Okay, it's about this genetic inheritance, which we were talking about before, and we were talking about it vis-a-vis intelligence prior, and now we're talking about it vis-a-vis people's affinity towards each other. People prefer their in-groups. Okay, so the first yes, obviously is a yes, because everyone is racist. The second answer, which is a no, is because, well, of course, in the way in which you're using the term racist, that kind of, sitting over there, snaring at the black guy, not stopping for the black guy in your cab in New York City, not, actively trying to suppress people, not, blocking them in different kinds of ways that, oh, well, of course, not all black people are racist in that way. And then how do you answer the question? Well, phrase the question that way. Let's see where they go with this.
The answer. So yes, let's look at yes first.
Mhm.
Well, are all people racist? Probably.
Probably. Yeah.
Probably. Like, we have really, really intense in-group affiliative tendencies.
And yet we're supposed to suppose that maybe, especially North American white people, can learn to not be racist, unlike all other people in the world. That's a tough proposition.
Well, all of us, it's very difficult for all of us to overcome our in-group biases.
Good point, Dr. Thunder. Tribalism, as a matter of scientific reality, racism is a different thing, because tribe is about tribe and ethnicities, and race is a different kind of a construction. Race is a later on type thing. Race is after we kind of went into the world, explored the world, and found all these different people, and then we grouped them differently and started a different ism about that. However, if we take a step back, the fundamental problem is what, Dr. Thunder? The fundamental problem is division. The fundamental problem is it doesn't matter what makes you different from me, right, Dr. Thunder? I'm going to hate you because of it. That's what the human race does. So tribalism is one expression of that. Hating your neighbors is another expression of that. The team sports is another expression of that. Or racism is another expression of that. We also know about the experiments whereby people are given, different hair color or whatever, and they start hating each other. In other words, division, difference. Human beings will look for this difference in order to, and again, this is not that kind of a stream. Maybe tomorrow we can do something more, shall we say, internal in terms of psychology, and talk about why indeed we tend to look for difference. Okay, it's because we're trying to other people and create a kind of a border around ourselves in order to feel safe. So goes that particular proposition. However, difference is at the root of all of this, is it not?
And we never even want to do it completely, because we want to love our family specially. And we also only have a limited amount of time and attention. So we have to love some people specially, or do nothing at all for anyone. So this is a huge problem. So by stating it that way, that all white people are racist, you make racism a subcategory of white, and you actually underplay the terrible catastrophe and significance of the problem. And that's very dangerous, because we all have to contend with this in-group preference and our proclivity to demonize anyone we put in the out-group. And now that's a terrible tendency.
Yeah, and that question is one of them where I depart from what I wish were my.
Yeah, every little camel jockey, desert monkey out there feels special, feels exceptional, right? In their little dirty tribe without clean clothes, okay? Shout out to my fellow humans out there. We all tend to want to feel special for several reasons, especially to the degree to which we are kind of extrinsically motivated, which is, again, I'm just talking about most people. This is most people. This is how most people are, right? Most people we do that thing, okay? Now, the comment on the screen, though, says, hey, there is this group, though, that maybe could put some, they have something to back it up with. They can, even if they, didn't particularly do anything, this particular person claiming white pride, neither he nor their generation before nor generations before in terms of their family or lineage did anything, but they can say, hey, I'm going to identify with this group. It's the white group. And we got some badass things going on. We got the whole modernity thing going in terms of building these big ships, coming in with guns and a nice officer corps and conquering the hell out of people, right? So you can say, hey, in this whole thing of everybody popping their collar, we can pop our collar too. But then comes this notion of punching up versus punching down, which brings us to the real question of forbidding questions, forbidden, shall we say, humor. You cannot make fun or broach certain topics, because if you're on top, you're not supposed to, shall we say, punch down, right? Punching down somehow came through from the comment on the screen. Let's continue.
Comrades, in that, are all white people racist? You know what? Probably to some extent. The white person who couldn't have an ounce of racism identified in them, even with sophisticated psychological testing, is probably vanishingly rare. Sure. And my sense of it is, when it's gotten to the point that it has, who cares? And I've often said to audiences, and I've watched some Black people in audiences, having not heard this, understand what I mean. If you really do have a basic self-love, then the fact that the whites around you have various degrees of racism really just shouldn't matter, because life consists of about 1,000 things other than whatever that residual racism is in that white person across the room who is, married to a Black person and, does all the sorts of things that these supposedly racist but hyper woke white people do. It's just, why does it matter so much? Now, it's one thing for somebody in 1925 to talk about white racism, 1955, 65. But today, my feeling about it is, with most of the white people that a Black person who talks about that sort of thing most knows, the answer is yes, most of the white people are probably very slightly racist, but not in any way that will remotely matter.
Yeah, who are the white people in the chat room right now? Because we have just been informed that you are probably slightly racist in the bad way, not just in the regular preferring your family way, but there's some slight of the bad thing going on. And and shout out, already described my personality earlier, whereby I feel comfortable saying those kinds of things, or comfortable living in a world where that is the case and that is true and perfectly fine. I'll still have Starbucks with you and everything. Like, it doesn't even matter at all. It's just like saying the sky is blue.
Yes, most of the white people are probably very slightly racist, but not in any way that will remotely matter in your life, even including being friends with them and sometimes close friends. Why are we so obsessed with that? And I think that's a very legitimate question. Life is about so much more than obsessing over something like that, except that when you obsess over something like that, you're part of a group. It's us versus them. And you have a sense of purpose and a sense of virtue because you're the person who's being racist. But I find that a rather feeble way of going about an existence with true virtue. I've never used that word so much as today.
It might also indicate interference with the process of coming to terms with your own in-group preference and tendency to derogate whatever out-group you happen to be surrounded by. I mean, I do see this as a terribly deep human problem. I presume that in the 1970s that Jane Goodall found that chimps go on raiding parties, right? And that was a major league discovery. It shows how that proclivity to demonize the out-group is at least 6 million years old. Right.
Definitely.
It's deep and it's in us. And so, and we all have to contend with it. And so now we could have an intelligent conversation nonetheless about the manner in which the predominance of one ethnic group in a given society might exacerbate those tendencies.
Of course.
But that's something that's certainly independent of the notion that all white people are racist. Right?
And then you can also see that, it's easy to believe that progress doesn't happen than to admit that it happens slowly. The degree to which most white Americans are racist in 2021, not to mention white Canadians from what I've seen, is much, much smaller than anybody would have expected about 30 years ago. So the question is also just extent. And yet virtue is excellence in my mind. If we're talking about Aristotle, virtue is not moral upstandingness, it's excellence. You can't be excellent. You can't live an excellent life if you're hobbled in distorted views of what racism is and how much it matters. These particular things.
Aristotelian virtue ethics, basically saying that good is what good does. Very mechanistic. What is good? Well, what is a good eye? A good eye sees well. It's about excellence. It's about the ability to do, as opposed to some kind of platonic up in the sky God, if you will.
You can't be excellent. You can't live an excellent life if you're hobbled in distorted views of what racism is and how much it matters. These particular things will not allow you to be the best that you can be, unless you think that the best that you can be is somebody who is hyper articulate about discussing bias against other people. And what a narrow topic. There's so much to do. And so I just chafe against it.
I think that's an excellent place to close, if you don't mind. And I really enjoyed our conversation. It flew by as far as I was concerned. And I hope you
Thanks for having me.
I hope you have the success that you deserve with your new book, Woke Racism, How a New...
Okay. So another example of a question that, shall we say, we should be able to ask.
I was curious about you because
the common sense aspect of the common sense nature of the answer is what really should give us pause, in the sense that, we're not over here breaking really. Here's what I mean by that. We need to be, as a species, okay, doing some really heavy thinking. Also as individuals, right? Doing some really heavy thinking, some really heavy iterations, back and forth, learning, right? Hypothesizing, testing, and whatnot. And this level, okay, of arguing about this kind of stuff is a huge distraction. This is very low level thinking that's going on here. I'm just saying that we have not broken new ground. we asked the question, for example, are all white people racist? And then we just kind of took it on the different layers. We said difference. Yeah, people always do the difference thing. And then we distinguished between even race, ethnicity, tribalism, all these kinds of things, aspects of difference in one's identity, and obviously blah, 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 blah. And then we went on. This is not groundbreaking thinking. However, because we are distracted by the fact that we cannot say certain things and ask certain questions, and Sam Harris wants to say things like, well, why do you want to know about race and IQ and all that kind of stuff? Then you have to spend time and energy explaining why you're asking the question. And this is not groundbreaking thinking, these simple explanations and anti-wokeisms that we're doing. These are not groundbreaking thinking. These are distractions, okay? These are the like basic kindergarten stuff, right?
At the beginning, that even though your mother had taught you, in some sense, these woke precepts, there was something in you that rebelled against it.
Yeah,
what was that?
Yeah, it's not. I don't rebel against the idea that, for example, there is institutional racism. I don't think it should be called that, but there are inequities in society between, say, black and white that are due to racist attitudes, usually in the past, and racist biases and racist lookings past. All of those things are definitely true. There are all sorts of things in Black history that have helped to set us back that one should certainly know about. One should know about the redlining of neighborhoods where in many cities, most Black people lived in neighborhoods where banks would not give you a loan. All of these things are very real. I never felt like I rebelled against that. What I rebelled against was the idea that you base your whole sense of identity upon those things such that you live a life that's abbreviated because you're exaggerating how bad it still is, and you're distorting what's necessary to create dignified lives for Black people. And my feeling's always been, you probably have about 80 years. You know, you're lucky.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned virtue earlier, because now he's talking about people that are exaggerating, and we talk about virtue signaling, right? That the idea is, you know, there is a church somewhere that can make you immediately a holy man that is respected, and by the parishioners, by the people who can go to this church. Okay, if you say these right things, if you virtue signal in these right ways, wear this cloth, raise this flag, pump your fist in the air 3 times, you will be seen as infallible. You can actually demonstrate and see this power. You can walk into the campus, you can walk into the college campus, you can see people sitting there selling you this religion, right? Giving you these pamphlets, indoctrinating you, calling you in, beckoning you in. Sam Harris mentioned earlier, these people whom define the Overton window in the media and the PWIs, the public white institutions, as Dr. Thunder would call it, academia, right? Now, virtue signaling is something that's very enticing. That's why I said that. In other words, not only is it enticing, but people are actually selling it to you. People are saying, hey, I got you. Guess what? All that hard stuff about meditating or yoga or discipline or exercise and, you know, whatever, or, you know, whatever it is, kind of religious, spiritual discipline, okay? Being a monk. No, forget all that. I got the real stuff for you. And you can actually test the power, okay? You can scream at some, shall we say, congressperson who comes to speak at your school because you think he's, you know, anti-gender affirming healthcare, for example, and you will be seen as righteous, okay, because you are screaming our chants, okay? This is virtue signaling, and this is not a small topic in the sense that it is a spiritual thing, okay? I mean that it is a deep need for people to want to be, shall we say, virtuous. The, shall we say, bond that keeps the groups together has something to do with morality as well, right? All those other kinds of things, okay? So it's a kind of a need. And then you have these kids coming into the schools. I'm using the school example now because I think that is an important headquarters for, you know, for the church, if you will, for this particular church. And they sell you this stuff, and they sell you instant virtue. It's rather enticing, is what I'm saying, right?
If you've got 80 years, and if you spend your whole life maintaining, in my time period, the same battle poses in the 80s and 90s that people needed in the 50s and 60s. After a while, you've spent your life play acting, and then you die and the world goes on. What I rejected was the exaggeration. And so, for example, I remember what really, if there was one moment where I realized there was something wrong with me, it was in the wake of the Rodney King trial in 1991. And a lot of Black people I liked very much were united in saying, what happened to Rodney King shows that a Black man can't get justice in this country. And I remember thinking, no, that statement would have made sense in about 1965 and in many American cities, 1975. And there were islands of it, even in 1990.
What does that statement mean? We have all heard this, and I'm curious. Perhaps let's explore, right? That statement of something that just happens is it means that black people can't get justice, or it's an illustration that black people can't get justice, or particular people can't get justice. And he's using recent examples. In other words, this is a chronological deal here. He's saying, look, the kinds of things that would hold you back, the kinds of racisms, after we talked about the fact that yes, everyone is racist, and yes, all white people are racist, and even within the particular kind of whiteist racist sense, yes, most white people are racist in that sense as well, and that's fine, right? That's all good. However, their racism is actually not, it's not going to stop you from getting things done. And then something like Floyd happens, right? And then some say, you see, Floyd is the example that shows Floyd is the deal, telling us that, there is no justice still. Now, when intelligent people say this, not the mob, right? Not the mob. What do they mean? Or are you, perhaps in the chat, maybe you can elaborate, say something. Are you the kind of person that would say something like this? Or shall we say steel man this point? I would naturally not say something like this, but I'm trying to find perhaps where the point is, what they're trying to say. Now, you can start by saying, look, are they just narrowly focused? Are they just actually saying, look, I'm talking about the fact that there needs to be better police training, and there should not be people, black or white, dying in the street like this. Okay. That is one place to look and actually say, well, this is an actual problem, and this problem is big and must be solved. And that's fine. We allow people their issues. We allow people their priorities and prerogatives when it comes to political discourse, when it comes to political activism, when it comes to, being a quote unquote one issue voter. If the issue is, shout out to Dr. Thunder, very important, then of course you'd be a one issue voter. So that is one way to steel man that position, saying that, look, there is something deep and rotten about the fact that anyone is dying. Maybe I have particular arguments and measurements to make with regards to comparisons of the groups and the rates at which they die, and rates at which they encounter the cops, rates at which these encounters between the police and these different groups escalates, right? We can do all that kind of comparison. However, there is the question that remains. Let's continue.
Something wrong with me. It was in the wake of the Rodney King trial in 1991, and a lot of black people I like.
Right. The question that remains of the Rodney Kings and the Floyds, and what does it mean?
Very much were united in saying what happened to Rodney King shows that a black man can't get justice in this country. And I remember thinking, no, that statement would have made sense in about 1965 and in many American cities, 1975. And there were islands of it even in 1991. But the idea that as a 20-something black person, you were living in a country where you just couldn't get justice, it struck me as beyond rhetoric, especially given the general attitude they had towards what being black meant then, as we were standing around at Stanford University, a campus where all of us had been evaluated according to adjusted standards out of the idea that we were really wanted on that campus, et cetera, that we were supposed to still be speaking that language that the Black Panthers had spoken. It struck me as a pose. And there was a part of me that was deeply disturbed by the artificiality of it, and that you were actually expected to live it.
Why are the okay, so you use very specific words. Oppose, artificial, as opposed to what? Like on what base? Like you're comparing it to something, sure. And it sounds like you're comparing it.
Yeah. So what is the moral basis for this idea that people are exaggerating? If you say people are exaggerating, what is your moral basis for making that judgment? What is the benchmark for normal reaction? You're saying, it's not that a big deal, right? It's not a big deal. Maybe in 1960 something was a big deal. Okay. Again, I'm on this mission, and shout out to Jordan Peterson actually for continuing the mission here with this question. Mission of steel man in the position, basically meaning let's not make a straw man out of the position of people whom say that certain events means that black people cannot get justice in this society, right? What are they saying? I started out by saying that at least number one, they could be talking about the narrow point of what actually happened, right? That this bad thing happened and this is a problem. Okay, cool. That's number one thing. But by what basis do we say that they're exaggerating? Now, granted, when I started this whole conversation, I already mentioned that we should not necessarily give in to the most sensitive amongst us. Otherwise, thinking cannot go on, because thinking, this dialogical process, has to happen with things arguing against each other, whether it's the scientific process again, or whether it's you trying to think. It's usually different aspects of yourself, past self, future self, or present self, big head versus small head, whatever it is that are contending, and you experience that as images and symbols. In other words, symbols, language, and images in your head. Okay, that's the process. It's a physiological dance that you experience in a particular way. So would go this particular rant, right? But by what standard are we saying that they are whining? Okay, and let's see what. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure by what standard I'm saying that they're whining. Here's my position, though: is I don't mind that they whine. Okay, so long as they don't get into be in power to control the Overton window, or be like the Sam Harris who would question why you're asking certain questions, right? I think the Glenn Lowrys of the world should be in charge. And obviously I'm biased in that regard. But I think that the rule, therefore, would be easy, which will be that common sense and logic you should err on that side. Like, expect people with bad motives to be asking questions. People who are asking questions such as race and about the correlations between class and IQ, and then where there will therefore be a racial component. Okay, that people who are asking that question are human beings, so they're going to have flaws. They're going to have ideas. They're going to have racist ideas. They may have bad and good ideas. It doesn't matter. It's not my job to police these things. It's my job to look at the logical form of the proposition in front of me and be able to engage with that. In other words, in a non-sticky way, the stickiness which we defined earlier on. But let's go now and see what John McWhorter would say as to why he can call people exaggerating and whatnot with regards to complaining about these events, the Rodney Kings and the George Floyds. But shout out to the super chat before we continue. Thank you very much. Just call me Brian, the African American Android user. Great topic, he says. Well, thank you very much. So let us continue.
And you don't just regard it as an exaggeration. Your criticism has gone farther than that in the past. I mean, you've also directly stated that conceptualization of the problem in this form is actually interfering with the solutions that we still need to generate. Mm-hmm. So it's not just an exaggeration; it's a problem in and of itself, and that's a deeper criticism. Mm-hmm. So what's the artificiality as far as you're concerned, and compared to what? Yeah, what you're trying to live, apparently. But what is that exactly?
The question is, how much of an obstacle is racism after formal segregation has been battled?
That's a very good response. I'll let him go, for those of you who say, well, why don't you just let him speak? Yeah, but, I was like, okay, cool. So again, how are we going to defend ourselves against saying other people are exaggerating? His response is saying, look, I'm looking at my objective ruler. Okay, my objective ruler is how much of an obstacle is what you're saying. Okay, how much of an obstacle is it? Because you're sitting here over with me at some prestigious university or some place in media or something, right? More or less kind of living freely and doing what you want and making these protestations, right? So where are the real obstacles, he says?
After racial attitudes changed profoundly in the 1970s, and I'm just old enough to have watched that happen, it gets to the point where, okay, racism does exist, both social and institutional, but how much of an obstacle is it to doing pragmatic things that will make poor Black people less poor and all Black people happier? So a quick example would be that these days you can look at the fact that Black kids tend not to do as well on standardized tests as other kids. It's there. Now, you can look at that and you can say, well, if Black kids don't do as well on the test, that's because of racism. And so we need to eliminate the test because the test is racist. Mm-hmm. Now, in what way is the test racist? 40 years ago, maybe those tests asked you what wine goes with chicken. That hasn't been true for generations now. So it's not about asking people things that they have no reason to know. How is it racist? And there are people today who even will imply that Black thought is somehow incompatible with tests like that, which is very close to saying that Black people are incapable of disembodied abstract thought.
Right. And we revisit this topic, and we revisit the topic of Charles Murray and the fact that Sam Harris swallowed the fact that people called him a racist and said that his book should not be read and that he's a bad guy for asking simple questions. And then Sam Harris had to go swallow his words after reading the book Sam Harris is a real-time person that actually will change his mind. Shout out to Sam Harris, okay, in that regard. And I already kind of complimented him in the sense that if I was going to, in other words, I've spent a lot of time talking about Sam Harris, so obviously I have some respect for the guy, right? So if I'm going to spend a lot of time explaining why you're an idiot, it's because, you know, that you're an interesting idiot at least, right?
And many whites will chime in.
It's probably
with black
identical
people
with
saying
that claim.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate,
Mhm.
especially given that the people who are saying it know very well the history of that being said about black people. And so you look at the tests and you say that because black kids don't do well on them, they are examples of systemic racism. Well, you have to get rid of racism, so you have to get rid of the tests, which means that you tell America that black kids can't have their abstract reasoning measured without it being racist. And then when you get somebody saying, well, then black kids just must not be as quick on the uptake, you call them a racist. And in the meantime, it's ignored.
So what's that double standard, A Hill? The double standard of saying, hey, you know what? Shout out to Jordan, shout out to Dr. Thunder. Hey, you know, maybe you gotta, you know, it's gotta be embodied, you know, like you gotta teach them dancing math. The black kids gotta dance, right? You can't just stay still. They gotta be moving like this. You gotta give them little maracas too. You know, that's how they learn the math. That's how the black is. Anyways, this idea, which we see, these kinds of ideas that talk about the different ways of being and knowing and learning and blah and blah and blah. On the one hand, they have those ideas, and then on the other hand, someone who says, "Okay, well, let's measure the uptake of blah blah blah," they're like, "Ah, you're a racist," or "Why would you be looking at the fact that they don't do well?" All those other kinds of things, right? So obviously, in my opinion, it just kind of shows the whole game and silliness of it all. We all know it's silly, and as I said, debunking this stuff is not high-level reasoning. This is kindergarten stuff, but we're spending a lot of time doing kindergarten stuff, meaning the people whom would seek to control at any given moment that Overton window and guard it very closely, okay, are winning. If you're spending a lot of time and a lot of energy, a lot of brain cells, a lot of freaking data, megabytes of videos by the intellectual dark web and whatnot, making simple points about obvious things.
America that black kids can't have their abstract reasoning measured without being racist. And then when you get somebody saying, well, then black kids just must not be as quick on the uptake, you call them a racist. And in the meantime, it's ignored that you consider helping black kids get better at the tests, helping black kids' parents realize what free test prep programs there are in those neighborhoods. The tests just take a little bit of practice, but you're not supposed to talk about it because the tests, quote unquote, are racist. It's an abuse of language, and it's abuse of the very conception of what racism is. That's not what my mother raised me in. That's not your grandmother's racism. That's something that comes from a way of thinking that was marginal in 1955, became sexy in about 1966, and here in 2021 is being treated as impregnable wisdom. Someone black has to speak out against that. So that's what I mean by the exaggeration and the artificiality and the out.
Okay. Exaggeration, artificiality. And Jordan Peterson says, compared to what? By what measure do you say this? And then he says, my objective standard is, well, there's actually no real impediment to people achieving what they want, including black people doing certain things, poor black people, he said, okay, lifting them out of poverty, that we know these things and actually these opportunities do exist, okay? And he also said that, look, this kind of psychologizing of racism is also new, that before it was this fountain or that fountain, front of the bus or back of the bus. Now it's about microaggression and privilege and transgressing upon the justice of, what are the terms again, Dr. Thunder? There's the justice term and then there's the affirmation term. You know, you're not affirming someone's existence somehow, or you're not teaching them jazz math or whatever it may be, that it's a very psychological endeavor now, and that this psychological endeavor definitely is new, he would argue, right? That this is different. This is not your grandma's racism. And the fact that it is new is evidence of the fact that it is an exaggeration. It is a grasping at straws. It is not so substantial, if you will. Now, people would be, I can assume, a counter argument, which will say, hey, the psychological is actually the microaggression, and these psychological little things are actually the most important ones, okay? And you, Ike, and you, John McWhorter, and Jordan Peterson are kind of biased stoics, okay? And this stoic attitude is perhaps an expression of toxic masculinity, is it not?
Right harm that comes from these sorts of things.
Well, and with regard to it being a pose. So is it a pose of so I could say, well, is it a pose of unearned virtue? I mean, virtue is not easy to earn, true virtue. You have to establish, let's say, we'll see where we go with this. Maybe you have to establish a relationship with beauty, and beauty is real. You have to establish a relationship with truth, and truth is real. And so to earn virtue is difficult because beauty and truth are imposing and formidable. If you have any sense at all, you see that. And so that's a daunting task to establish.
Yeah, he's making the point we said earlier when we were talking about virtue signaling. In other words, getting actual virtue is actually really, really hard. And also, Mr. John McWhorter mentioned Aristotelian virtue ethics, talking about the fact that, the good is what it does, right? It's about excellence as opposed to some kind of a Platonic good, pure, abstract good, or God, if you will. So coming back here now, saying virtue is indeed difficult, right?
Establish genuine virtue, and a terrifying task. And is the pose the willingness to adopt? See, because when I talk to the ideologue types, and maybe that happened most famously with an interview I had with, I think it was
I was just thinking about it. You mean Michael Eric Dyson, right? Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't thinking about Dyson. I was thinking about a GQ interviewer, and that interview's been watched like 40 million times now. It's this ideological pose is the aping of virtue, as far as I can tell. And I mean that in sort of a technical sense, is that you master this language and it contains the expressions of true virtue. But, the kind of problems that you were talking about, and I see this on the environmentalist side of things too. Well, how do you get black kids to do better in elementary school, let's say? Well, that's a more manageable problem. It's a problem that would take a little bit more humility to conceptualize. And it's also a really, really hard problem. And so to be virtuous in your attempts to solve that would probably require the dedication of your entire life, really, to take a good crack at that problem, right? Because that's a tough problem, man. And so maybe you don't want to do that and then you're enticed by your educators into this alternative possibility where all you really have to do is master a set of propositions and you're on the winning side. And that also gives you some convenient enemies, and maybe it fulfills to some degree the religious instinct. And it appalls me to see the universities complicit in this. And that they've come to see that. And I think part of that falseness and artificiality that you described, I think the fact that exists is part of the overbearing insistence that the veil not be lifted and that no one question this, because what is underneath it is so damn ugly.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I think we've tried to do some steel manning here of the people whom we may be saying are complaining, are whining, and we're saying we, generally speaking, should not give in to A, mob, or B, the most sensitive amongst us, because these two things tend to be more on the irrational side of things. So, and the worst thing is a sensitive mob, right? Which it seems like we're dealing with in this case. Now, we started this out by Professor Glenn Loury at the Comedy Cellar, the Comedy Cellar, and he was out there giving a talk, talking about, how are we going to talk about these things? How are we going to have these particular conversations, ask these questions? How are we going to deal with third rail topics, things that are, going to get you politically suicided? How do we discuss those? Are comedians not the appropriate means?
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and make some noise for Professor Glenn Loury.
It is comedy and politics. Now, I came to this from many years of trying to write about race and racial inequality issues in America, and finding that there were third rails. There was stuff that you couldn't say. There was a lot of political correctness. There's a lot of self-censorship. And I have this idea. My idea, and we'll see what my colleagues here think about it, here at the Glenn Show. I don't think I said that. That's my platform. That's my podcast.
Subscribe to Glenn Loury.
Substack, and you can find a YouTube channel, Glenn Loury Show. But trying to talk about these issues in a way that opens up some space for exchange of ideas, for grappling with the stuff that we really have to grapple with if we're going to get to be in a better place, and for let some air into the room. The stifling suppression of debate and open discussion leads to a limiting of our own ability to think about the issues that we're confronted with. And I see comedy, again, I don't know what my esteemed colleagues will say about this, and I certainly don't know what you comics out there are going to say about this. We're going to find out. I see comedy as a way out, as a way to open up the room, as a way to get some honesty into the discussion, as a way to have some debates. Now, my mouth is not a prayer book, but I do have some ideas. Here's some things that I wish comics would help us talk about. Male-female cooperative and non-exploitative relationships in the workplace have been undermined to women's detriment by the Me Too movement.
I don't agree with that.
Wait a minute, I got it from you.
That's a fair point.
Trump wasn't wrong about everything. There really are some shithole countries. You'd remember if you'd ever been in one. And the Democrats have been running some of the cities where a lot of black people live into the ground for decades. Here's another one, folks. Embrace yourselves. I'm sorry.
There was no laugh on that one.
Putin has some legitimate grievances which we have ignored in part.
No
at our
laugh
peril
about them cities.
because of the Russia collusion hoax. Yeah, I know. I know. Okay. You see some black guys up here, right?
We're only like 5% into this list, so
Buckle up.
Blacks suck at IQ test. Jews don't. It really matters.
Yeah, maybe Glenn Lowry should try comedy because he's actually out here being serious, but it is quite funny. Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, please like that stream as you come in. By that stream, I mean this stream. Click the like button, okay? Click the subscribe button if you haven't already. Share the stream. Hit the bell button twice. All that good stuff. Let's continue.
percent into this list, so
Buckle up.
Blacks suck at IQ test. Jews don't. It really matters. Here's an easy
Mazel
one.
tov.
Here's an easy one. Our collective response to the COVID pandemic has had elements of an irrational moral panic. Now, an English professor whom I know and respect told me,
Yeah, that one got a clap. It's now that's like acceptable little when they clap for you, it's different. So if they laugh, it's one thing. If they're silent, it's one thing. And if they clap, it's something else. Well, which is obvious to us, but just something to point out, right?
there's a difference between when you say something and they clap and when you say something and they laugh. He said, remember, you're in a comedy club, so I'm going to try to keep that in mind. Okay, maybe one more. Well, maybe two more. Major elements of Black Lives Matter are full of shit and undeserving of the mantle of the civil rights movement. Yeah, I know. It's hard. And by the way, all I'm suggesting is let's talk about this stuff. This is not really my opinion. I'm not actually saying this. These are just things that I think only a comic could get away with saying. We need to talk, along with Dave Chappelle, about whether the transgender rights movement is normalizing mental illness.
We did talk about this, did we not, a couple of days ago, about the gender affirming healthcare. Now, Jeff Younger, a Texas House candidate, got students protesting and chanting "F these fascists" or "F this fascist" when he was invited to give a speech by the Young Conservatives Texas chapter in the University of Northern Texas. Okay. And he is seen as anti-gender affirming. Can you remind us what that is, Ahil, again? Gender affirming, and he was anti-gender affirming. And gender affirming healthcare is about gender dysphoria and young people. So medical intervention for gender dysphoria at the young age. And it is called gender affirming healthcare. Just a new term that's out there that I learned yesterday. I'm not sure how widespread it is yet, but you guys should look out for that. And so you know what it is. And the fact that it has this nice little marketing affirming wording there, which tells you, don't touch this. If you touch this, this is a third rail. Okay. We've set up a third rail here. We've set up a particular sacred cow you're not supposed to question. And we've signaled it by putting the word affirming in there. Okay.
Here's my coda. Mind you now, I'm not actually saying these things. I'm just saying that if one were to say them, it could be done most effectively in the voice of a comic. Smile when you say that has a deep meaning. My challenge to the real comics in this room is whether they agree with me or not, and I suspect they mostly don't. find ways of bringing considerations of these issues into the public consciousness.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think that we will bring this to a close. It has been an interesting 5 days, that is, and an interesting conversation that we have had here regarding the third rail, the political third rail, the things for which it will be political suicide for you to address. The Overton window, at least, is a mild form of that. Political correctness, you might say, is a mild form of that. All the way from the idea of something being in poor taste, which was in the way in which we handled it before, which is something else I wanted to bring. Perhaps we didn't have time to address it. In other words, looking back in culture and understanding the ways in which the Overton window was dealt with. Because it's not a question of an Overton window existing. It's always going to exist. The question of how narrow it is, how quickly it moves, and how it is, shall we say, defended, erected. How is it enacted, right? So in the past, let's say you tell the off-color joke, it may be just seen as or you say something which is uncouth, it be seen as in poor taste, let's say, but not let's mob. It's not like there's a ready mob for every issue. That's the thing. And perhaps also social media plays into this. And by that, I just mean technology, right? Technology plays into this in the sense that you can find a ready mob for any particular offense that you may have. Is that not true, Dr. Thunder A. Hill, and whoever else might be in the chat at this late hour as we bring this to a close? You can find a ready mob, and the Overton window is policed, erected, and enacted and narrowed, and also moves very quickly. If we look, for example, through the year 2020, we all know about the 91 DVOC, right? 2020 happened, and in the year 2020, we saw a rapid move of what was considered crazy conspiracy theory in terms of you're not supposed to talk about, let's say, the lab leak theory. And then 2 months later, it's okay. It's just common sense to talk about the lab leak theory. The same people who told you were crazy 2 months ago are now saying it's okay now, at least in the past. It used to be the case that, they would take time to rewrite the history books. Okay. Right now, they're doing it right in front of your eyes, right? They're like telling you you're crazy today and then telling you, of course, that was normal. Like, who said nothing? I didn't say nothing. What are you talking about? Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are out. Mr. Selector, keep coming with the grooves and rhythm sweet as nectar. I come feature this one again, Mr. Selector. Keep spreading niceness on the land and we'll respect ya. The people on the pavement, they attempt to measure while the fist